On the night of November 6, 1000 AD 962, in Alcatraz prison known as the Rock, which the whole world considers a prison, escaping from it is impossible, three prisoners decided to defy the impossible by using primitive tools. They were able to plan and execute a bold escape which made the whole world feel at ease. How were they able to widen these narrow ventilation holes? How were they able to make a boat out of simple materials? And what happened to them after they escaped from prison? Questions made people wonder, did they really try to achieve the impossible? And did they reach their goal? Or was their fate? It was death in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. Welcome, and let me tell you today about the story of the impossible escape from Alcatraz prison. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive a notification of the new story every week. And I want you to reach 20,000 likes before the next video. In 1934, Alcatraz Island was transformed from a military base into a maximum security federal prison, which is known as the Rock because of its location on an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay. It was designed to make escape impossible, and this was clear from the history of failed escapes that prisoners tried over the years. The prison itself was intended to accommodate the most dangerous criminals in America who no other prison could handle. And for this reason, the security was very tight, with watchtowers and searchlights monitoring the place day and night, and highly trained guards. All the corridors were full of alarms, and any unusual movement, the guards would move immediately and fill the place, and even the water around the island was part of the guard. The water was cold all year round, in addition to the strong water jets which would pull anyone who tried to swim in it. And on top of all that, it was also said that there were sharks in it. It wasn't just a prison, it was a symbol of fear and terror, and the prisoners who were locked in you, they would tell tragic stories of despair. What they lived every day, the thick cement walls and narrow cells, the long nights, and the sound of the waves crashing into the rocky shore of the island. A place like it came out of Jabus, and for this reason, any attempt to escape from it was considered madness. And since the beginning of its opening in 1934, many prisoners tried to escape, but most of them ended up either dying or being shot. And every escape attempt was failing and increasing. Simple prison. Escape from it is impossible, and despair and frustration increase for any prisoner who thinks even to himself of escaping. And let me tell you about the most famous attempts that failed to show you the difficulty of escaping. Or an escape attempt from Alcatraz was in 1936. Prisoner Joseph Bowers was tasked with burning garbage in the prison incinerator, and on April 27, while he was working normally, he suddenly decided to run and start climbing the iron fence that is on the edge of the island, and it was very clear that he was trying to escape. So when the tower guards noticed what was happening, they started calling him and asking him to come down immediately. But Joseph did not respond to their orders and continued. So at that time, the guards beat. The fire and hit her, and the injury made him fall from a very high height. And the incident was, of course, violent and caused him serious injuries that he died from, and Bowers' story was later known as the escape. Despair, and what it shows how much the prisoners were willing to risk everything in the hope of escaping. A year later, on the 16th of December 1937, two prisoners, Ralph Rowe and John, were working in the prison workshop. Over a long period of time, they were able to saw the iron bars that closed the workshop window. One day, the weather was very foggy, that the fog literally covered the entire island, so they decided to escape on that day. They actually took advantage of the fog and started sneaking out of the prison through the workshop window. As soon as they reached the edge, they jumped into the water. After that moment, no one saw them again. But the point is that that day was not just foggy. The weather conditions were very difficult, the water planes were very violent, and the bitter cold was unbearable. So the authorities assumed that they drowned, but when their bodies did not appear, they said that the planes might have towed them away. So as a precaution, they put them on the most wanted list. Another year passed almost. On the night of Friday, January 13, 1939, an escape attempt would take place. It would also end tragically. The five prisoners, Arthur Parker, William Martin, Rufus McCain, Henry Young, and Dale Stanfill, were known to be among the most dangerous prisoners in Alcatraz and were locked in the most secure part of the entire prison. But despite that, they managed one day to escape from their cells using some tools. They made them themselves. After they succeeded in getting out, they moved quickly and quietly towards the island's beach, and the plan was that they would build a boat using some materials they had collected. And when they reached the beach, they actually started building it and preparing to escape. But while they were working as watchtower guards, they noticed a strange movement happening on the beach, and as soon as they realized what was happening, they started shooting at the prisoners from all directions, and Asser was fatally injured and died at that moment, and this is what escaped. He was seriously injured but lived. The remaining 3 prisoners were arrested and completely isolated after that, and the guards on them became more tight than before. A few years passed, during which some simple attempts occurred, all of which also failed until we reached April 14, 1943 AD. On that day, a bold escape attempt occurred by 4 prisoners who were also working in the prison workshop, namely James Borman, Harold Brest, Floyd Hamilton, and Fred Hunter. The 4, while working in the workshop, carried out the same campaign. They cut the iron bars on the window of Workshop 11 and stole. Bags of the guards' clothes were brought to them to use as floats to ride on while escaping. On the night of the escape, the prisoners beat 2 of the guards and tied their hands and feet, and then escaped through the window. But during the escape, one of the guards was able to untie his embassy, and the other guard began whistling with it. As soon as the guards in the watchtower heard the embassy, they began shooting at the prisoners. Shams Borman was shot and fell into the water and lost consciousness. But Harold B., he followed him and held him while he floated on the bag. But when he approached the prison, he approached them. Priest was forced to leave him in the hope that he would be able to escape and drown James in the water, and his body would not be found after that. At the same time that this was happening, Frida Hunter was injured in his back and hands and lost hope of being able to swim and decided to hide in a cave on the island. But after 2 hours of searching, the guards were able to find him because of the traces of blood that were at the entrance to the cave, and as soon as they surrounded him, he immediately surrendered and was arrested. The only one left after all this story was Floyd Hamilton, who at first the guards thought had drowned just like Borman. But the truth is that Hamilton was hiding in the same cave where Hunter was. But after waiting 2 days in the cave, despair took over him, and he decided to return to the same window he had escaped from and hide in the storeroom, and was caught the next day right away. And in the end, James Borman paid the price with his life, and Priest, Hunter, and Hamilton were arrested and returned to prison again with penalties. From the beginning, 2 years passed, during which more than 1 attempt occurred. All of them also failed early until we reached the year 1946, when one of the most violent escape attempts in the history of Alcatraz prison occurred, which was later known as the Battle of Alcatraz. In the period between May 2nd and May 4, a group of prisoners tried to escape, namely Bernard Coy, Joseph Kritzer, Sam Shockley, Clarence Carnes, Marvin Hubbard, and Miran Thompson, the 6 prisoners. Their plan was to control the cell area, and after they did so, they overpowered the guards, reached the weapons room, and seized everything in it. And the plan was for them to escape via the prison boat itself. But when they could not open the external door of the prison, they decided to confront, and a battle took place in which they were able to hold 2 of the prison guards hostage. And after 2 days of violent clashes, Joseph Kritzer shot the hostages with him, and with the escalation and continuation of the issue, Shockley, Thompson, and Krenz despaired of their escape attempt and returned to their cells again, while Bernard Coy, Joseph Kritzer, and Marvin Hubbard refused to surrender. And the battle was so fierce that the US Navy intervened. After violent confrontations, the US forces were able to kill the 3 prisoners. After the battle ended, Shockley, Thompson, and Krenz were tried for killing the prison guards, and Shockley and Thompson were sentenced to death. As for Krenz, who was 19 years old at the time, he was sentenced to life in prison. And after that, how many other attempts were made? They all failed quickly. The failed escape attempt that I told you all shows the difficulty of escaping from prison. Every attempt failed. It increased the reputation of the prison that escape is impossible, and sent a message to the rest of the prisoners that escape is not only impossible, your very lives will be at stake. But all of this will change. In 1962, specifically on the night of June 11th, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin decided on a quiet summer night to carry out a daring escape plan. The plan would require great precision and tight execution that took months to prepare. Frank Morris was the mastermind and decided to choose the Anglin brothers because they were known for their swimming skills, and each of the 3 prisoners had a life story full of events that shaped his personality and made him able to think of escaping from the prison that everyone considered to be different. able to be released. Frank Morris was born on September 1st, 1926 and was orphaned when he was only 11, 13 years old, and was forced at that time to spend his life in one of the foster homes in Washington. And from there, he began his path to crime, from a young age or crime. His work in his life was when he was only 1 year old, which was the beginning of a series of crimes that are throughout his life, from drug possession to armed robbery to stealing cars. Every time he was arrested, he planned to get out of the prison he was in, and this increased his fame in the world of crime, to the point that he was known as the smart criminal. The one who could escape from any prison was known for his extraordinary intelligence. His IQ was 133 points on the IQ test, meaning he was in the top 2% of the world's population. And not only was he smart, he had an exceptional ability to plan, organize, and escape from prisons. It was a game for him, the last of which was 1 year before he entered Alcatraz, when he managed to escape from Al-Waziana prison, where he was sentenced to 10 years, imprisoned in a bank robbery case, and remained on the run for a year. Before he was arrested again, he was trying to commit another robbery, and in January 1960, Morris was transferred to Alcatraz prison in an attempt by the authorities to destroy his hopes of escaping from prison. But when he arrived, he considered the challenge more difficult than the one before it. Nothing more than that. He was certain that even Alcatraz would not be able to hold him, and from his first day in prison, he began studying every detail. The timing of the guards, the locations of the cameras, the way the doors open, every big and small detail. A year later, they received news that 2 old acquaintances had been transferred with him to Alcatraz prison, and these 2 were John Anglin and his brother Clarence Anglin. John Anglin was born on February 5th, 1930, and Clarence was exactly 1 year younger than him. The 2 were born in Georgia to a family of 14 brothers and a sister, a poor family who all worked in agriculture since they were young. And John and Clarence, since they were young, used to enter swimming races in frozen lakes and win. But the life of poverty made them take the path of theft and crime. It started with simple crimes such as stealing chickens and stealing crops. I say that they went until they reached the bank robbery in the early 50s. Their plans for the robbery were always characterized by boldness and precision, to the point that they would enter the bank in broad daylight. And they always did not hurt anyone during the robbery. And according to what they said, they never had a weapon with them. And the only time they were seen with a weapon was a toy gun. But on January 17, 1958, while they were robbing the Bank of Columbia, Alabama, they were arrested. They were sentenced to 35 years in prison, some of them in Florida State Prison, but when they tried to escape from it, they were transferred to Levine and Russell Federal Prison, and those who also tried to escape from it were transferred again to Atlanta Prison. And when they tried to escape from Atlanta Prison as well, they were told that these kids would not be served with anything but Alcatraz Prison. And on October 24th, 1960, they arrived at Alcatraz prison, and then they arrived immediately at Clarence on January 16th of the year 461. John Oaklands, when they arrived at Alcatraz and met Morris, who they had known for a few days, and this acquaintance turned into a strong friendship, especially after they learned that he was famous for his intelligence and ability to escape from prisons. As for Morris, he saw that these 2 were the ideal choice for the escape team. Morris knew their swimming skills, especially in cold water. So these were the ones who would be able to swim with him in the cold water of Francisco Bay, if they succeeded in escaping from prison and while they were, and the prison loopholes. Another prisoner named Alan West heard them, and because his cell was adjacent to Morse's cell, he contacted him and said to him, "I can show you the way to escape, but on the condition that you take me with you." He said that his job in prison was to clean the area above the roof of the cells, and one day, while he was working, he discovered a ventilation hole leading to the roof. When Morse heard this from him, he felt that there was really hope for escape, as he expected, and he began to use his intelligence to make a well-thought-out plan so that they could escape from this hole. And after studying the design of the building, he was able to know that the small ventilation holes located under the sink in each cell had connected passages behind them, through which they could reach the ventilation hole that he said was set. But the problem was that these holes were very small. It was impossible for an adult to pass through them, no matter how thin. And from here, began the first challenge in the most famous, a prison escape operation throughout history, Mars with his intelligence. They figured out how to exploit one of Alcatraz's strengths to succeed in warfare. The salty water surrounding the prison made some parts of the cement walls weaker than the rest. One of these walls was the area surrounding the ventilation holes in the cells. The prison did not maintain them regularly like other exposed areas. Here, Morse felt that using a few simple tools, he could widen the holes and get through them. This was the first step in their plan. They would not steal the soup spoons they ate with from the prison kitchen, which they would use in the digging process, but the problem was how would they be able to cover these holes after they started digging? And when would they dig without anyone noticing or hearing a knocking sound from outside the cell? After consulting with the four of them, they agreed that the digging time would be from 6:30 to 7:30 in the evening, because this was the time when the prisoners were allowed to play music, and the four of them would take turns watching the guards' movements so that no one would notice what they were doing. After they finished, they would cover the hole with cardboard boxes the same color as the wall and put some junk on it, so that it would not be obvious that there was anything strange. After weeks of digging, Morse, being the mastermind, began looking for new tools to speed up the digging process a bit. He found an old saw that was thrown away in the prison storeroom and an old vacuum cleaner that they used to clean. He removed the motor from it and made a primitive digging tool to help them carry out the plan. At that time, many prisoners knew what was happening in Morse's cell and his friends. Some testimonies even say that there were 80 prisoners who knew what was happening. However, in order to take revenge on the authorities and break the myth of the impossible escape from Alcatraz, none of them reported it or even asked anyone to stay with them. They were also being watched, and one by one, the plan began to develop. They made faces out of soap, paper, and dirt that came out of the holes and kept putting them on their beds as if they were sleeping and kept digging all night. Clarence was responsible for collecting hair for these dolls since he worked in the prison barbershop. After months of digging and expanding, all that was left was for them to think about the most important part of the plan, which was how will they be able to cross the Gulf water and reach the nearest shore without drowning or getting eaten by sharks. One day, Morris found a paper from a magazine called The Famous Mechanics. There was an article written explaining how to make a boat out of rubber using simple tools, and from here he got the idea to make a boat to escape with, and the material they would use was the jackets or coats that prisoners wore in the very cold weather. These clothes were made of rubber, so they were able to gather more than 50 people over time, and they stole an old sewing machine from a workshop. They also stole steam pipes to heat the rubber and fix the welds, in addition to some wood and nails that they stole in the bakery to make the catapults that they would use to steer the boat. And thus all that was left was the place where they would work with all these tools. And here came Alan's turn again, because he knew that there was an area in the prison that was completely deserted. None of the guards came near it, so he deliberately took dirt from the hole they dug every day and threw it on the roof. He swept hard with a broom so that the dust would fall on the heads of the guards who were circling the cells. And when they started to get annoyed by the dust, they allowed him to take old blankets to close them with so that the dust would not fall on them while he was cleaning. And this was the most important step in the escape plan, and the prison guards themselves helped them with it. The area he said he chose was the area with the ventilation hole that was the basis of the escape idea from the beginning. And because every step was carefully calculated, they were able, through the holes they dug in their cells, to reach passages from which they could exit to the deserted place. And day after day, they began to move all the equipment they had collected from the prison workshop and turned the place into a secret workshop in the heart of the prison. And they began to go to the workshop through the secret passages they had made when the guards' patrols were a bit quiet. And of course, they did not forget to leave the dolls they had made on the beds so that if someone passes by, they won't notice that they aren't there. At this stage, the plan had already begun to take its final shape, and each one of them knew very well the role he was playing and the role he would play in the next stage, and every day they practiced the steps they would take to make sure they could implement them quickly and without mistakes. And of course, the boat was the most important target for them. Because it was the only hope of escaping from the place, it had to be perfect. Before the promised night, the 4 prisoners returned. All the details, tested the boat and the escape rafts, and began preparing to implement the plan. And around 9 p.m., Maurice, John and Clarence were sitting in their cells waiting for the last guard patrol to do their routine round and make sure that all the prisoners were in their places so that they could then begin the first step of the escape steps. And as soon as the awaited moment came, they began to remove the boxes they were covered with. The passage, but Allen on the promised night could not open the hole that was in his cell. The cement that he was using to fix the boxes hardened completely, and after many attempts, he realized that he would not be able to catch up with his friends and decided to return to his cell and surrender to his fate. And at that time, Maurice and the Anglin brothers were able to reach the secret passage and began climbing the pipes that would lead them to the roof. And after they got down from the roof, they encountered the second obstacle, the high prison walls in it, barbed wire, and immediately began using their primitive tools that they had made and began cutting the wires so that they could go out to the northern shore of the island. And after they reached the shore, they began to inflate the boat using a Morris musical instrument that was adjusted so that it would blow air without making a sound, and began their journey in the cold waters full of strong currents, heading to Angel Island and from there to the mainland. At the beginning of the day, at 7 a.m., the guards began to go around the cells to wake up the prisoners, but they were surprised that Maurice, John and Clarence did not get up from their places, despite calling them more than once. And when one of the guards entered the cell, he discovered that it was just a doll. And at that moment, a state of chaos occurred throughout the prison, and the guards began to search for the 3 prisoners everywhere. The guards informed the authorities and directed a team from the FBI to investigate the case of their disappearance, and the first one to be interrogated was Allen West, because of the hole they found in his cell, which was similar to it in the other 3 cells. And Allen was forced to confess and tell them about the plan from the beginning, and based on his confession, a comprehensive search of the island and the surrounding water began in one of the largest search operations in the history of the FBI. The next morning, the FBI men found an oar in the water and some traces of the tools used by the 3, but there were still no traces of the bodies in the water nor on the nearby beaches. And when the search team arrived at Angel Island, they found a plastic bag containing pictures of Angeline's family and some personal belongings. And so the question arose, did the 3 really succeed in escaping? Or did they drown in the cold water after moving from Angel Island? In the years that followed the escape operation, many theories emerged, some of which suggest that they succeeded in implementing their plan and are now living somewhere in disguise. And the most supporting thing for this theory are the unsigned postcards and letters that were reaching their families from time to time. For example, John and Clarence's mother received letters from an unknown person every now and then. And when she died at her funeral, it was said that 2 strange-looking women attended the funeral and left immediately after, and many people after that. They were John and Clarence, but in disguise. And in 1975, 13 years after their disappearance, a picture of 2 people living in Brazil appeared, their features resembling John and Clarence. But despite that, no one was able to reach the 2 after that. And the FBI, after searching for them for 15 years, closed the case and said that the 3 must have drowned in the water. But the surprise was that in 2013, a message arrived to the FBI. From one. It is him, John Anglin, and that he lives in San Francisco, and that he is the only one still alive of the 3 who escaped and is sick with cancer and wants to surrender himself in exchange for medical treatment. But the authorities ignored the message and said that it is definitely just a hoax. And to this day, no one knows whether they actually escaped and continued their lives or whether they drowned before completing the plan. But what is certain is that they broke the myth that Alcatraz is a prison. Escaping from it is impossible. And so we've reached the end of the story. Wait for your opinion. If you have a story you want us to tell you, write it in the comments, and the idea that I find a lot of interaction with, I will implement it. Show me the energy, subscribe, like, comment, and all this beautiful work. And share the video with anyone you think will like it. And I'll see you next time with a story that's more interesting than the one before.